The doctor called my son 39 times. 39 times. And he never picked up once. I know that number because the nurse, a young woman named Preethi, who couldn't have been older than 25, she told me afterward, when I was finally awake enough to understand words again. She said it quietly, like she was ashamed on his behalf. She didn't need to be. That shame wasn't hers to carry. I'm 68 years old. I live alone in a small house in Guelph, Ontario, the same house I've lived in for 31 years. My husband passed in 2019, and after that it was just me and the garden and the cat my daughter-in-law had given me as a kind of consolation prize when she moved my son 3 provinces away. The cat's name is Biscuit. He's orange and disagreeable, and he's the one who kept me sane through most of what I'm about to tell you. My son's name is, well, I'll call him my son. That's what he is, or was. That's the part I'm still working out. It was a Tuesday in February when it happened. I remember it was Tuesday because I always go to St. Andrew's on Tuesday mornings for the seniors Bible study group. It's not a big group, maybe 8 of us, a few retirees, a widower named Alan who brings Tim Hortons for everyone and never remembers that I take mine with 1 sugar, not 2. Small things. The kind of small things that make a week feel like it has shape. We were just finishing up. I'd stood to put on my coat, and I felt strange. Not painful at first, just strange, like the room had tilted 2 degrees to the left, and nobody else had noticed. I sat back down. I thought it was nothing. I thought I'd stood up too quickly, that it was the blood pressure thing my doctor had mentioned in passing at my last checkup. Then my left arm went numb. I remember thinking, very clearly, oh, this is that. The next thing I remember with any clarity is the ceiling of the Guelph General Emergency Room, and Preethi's face looking down at me asking if I knew my name, if I knew what year it was. I did. I knew everything. I just couldn't make my mouth cooperate. I'd had a stroke. A significant one, the cardiologist told me later. Not the worst he'd seen, but serious enough that the first 48 hours were what he called uncertain. That's a word doctors use when they don't want to say something scarier. During those 48 hours, the hospital tried to reach my son. 39 times. He lives in Calgary now. He moved there 4 years ago for work. Something in oil and gas consulting that I've never fully understood despite him explaining it multiple times. He has a good salary, a nice apartment, a girlfriend named, I'll call her his girlfriend, who I've met exactly twice in 4 years, both times briefly, both times at Christmas when they flew in for 36 hours, and spent most of it at her family's place across town. I don't say this bitterly. I said it to myself for a long time without bitterness, with a kind of resigned acceptance that this was how adult children lived now, that I should be grateful he called on Sundays. Which he did, most Sundays, for about 12 minutes on average, while he was doing something else, I could always tell. But 39 calls. The hospital had my emergency contact form on file. My son's name, his cell number, his Calgary address. Preethi told me they called that number. They called the landline I had listed. They even tried calling the consulting firm listed on an old form in my file from years ago. Nothing. No answer, sir. No voicemail response. No callback. When I was well enough to hold my phone, I looked at my messages. There were 2 from him, both from 4 days after my stroke, both sent at 7:48 in the morning his time. The first one said, "Hey Mom, just saw I missed some calls from a number in Guelph. Everything okay?" The second one, sent 11 minutes later, "Actually don't worry about it, probably spam, talk Sunday." I stared at those messages for a long time. He didn't know I'd had a stroke, but he knew he'd missed calls, multiple calls from a number he didn't recognize, and his response was to assume spam and move on. He didn't try calling back. He didn't wonder if something had happened to me. He just moved on. It was a Tuesday when I had the stroke. By the Saturday, I was stable. By the following Sunday, the Sunday he would normally call, I was sitting up in a hospital bed in a shared room, watching the door, wondering if the phone was going to ring. It did ring, at 5:17 in the afternoon. "Hey Mom," he said. "How's things?" I told him I'd had a stroke. There was a silence, then, "What? When?" "Last Tuesday," I said, "at St. Andrew's." Another silence. Why didn't anyone call me? I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. I could hear him breathing. I could hear something in the background, music or a television. The hospital called 39 times, I said. Your number was on my emergency contact form, he said. I never got those calls. I didn't argue with him. What was the point? Either he was lying or his phone had failed him in a way that defied statistical probability across 4 days and 39 attempts. I didn't have the energy to decide which was worse. He said he'd come. He said he'd get a flight. I told him not to bother. I don't know why I said it exactly. Part of it was that I was tired. Part of it was that I meant it. Somewhere in those days, lying in that hospital bed, being tended to by nurses who called me sweetheart and love, in the way that only hospital nurses can get away with, something had shifted in me. Something had gone quiet in a way that felt permanent. He came anyway. 2 days later, he was there for a day and a half. He sat in the chair beside my bed and scrolled his phone and asked the doctors questions that I suspect were mostly to seem engaged. He brought me a Get Well card from Shoppers Drug Mart that still had the price sticker on it. $8.99. He forgot to peel it off. His girlfriend had not come with him. She'd had a thing, he said. He didn't elaborate. On the second day, he started talking about my house, not in an obvious way. He was careful about it. He asked how I'd been managing, whether I'd thought about my situation, whether I'd looked into any of the options that existed for people in my position. He mentioned casually that property values in Guelph had gone up significantly, that it was maybe a good time to think about simplifying. He mentioned a seniors community in Mississauga, not a nursing home. He was very clear about that, not a nursing home, just a community that a colleague's mother had moved into and apparently loved. I listened to all of this. My house is paid off. My husband and I finished the mortgage in 2008. A modest pension from the school board, where I worked for 23 years, and some money my mother left me when she died. About $94,000 sitting in GIC at the credit union. Who about the GIC? My son knew about it. I'd mentioned it once, years ago, when I was updating my will. I'd told him it would be split between him and whatever charitable causes I decided on. I hadn't updated that will since before the stroke. He left on a Thursday morning. He hugged me at the door of my hospital room. He smelled like the hotel he'd been staying at. Something clean and generic. He said he'd call more often. He said I should think about the Mississauga place. He said to take care of myself. He did not say, I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry the hospital called 39 times and I didn't answer. I'm sorry you were alone. He just left. The one who did say something, the one who said all of it, actually, without using any of those words, was my neighbor. I'll call her my neighbor. She's 63, works part-time at the library, recently divorced after what she describes as a long and educational marriage. She has a key to my house because a few years ago, I locked myself out in January, and she was the sensible one to give it to. She was the one who'd called 911 the Tuesday it happened. One of the ladies from Bible study had called her because she had my home number and didn't know what else to do. She was at the hospital within the hour. She organized a rotation of people to check on Biscuit. She drove 40 minutes each way to bring me a bag of my own pajamas and my good cardigan and the book I'd been reading, which she'd found on my bedside table and correctly assumed I'd want. She sat with me in the hospital while my son was on his flight back to Calgary. She didn't ask about the house. She didn't mention the GI. She asked if I'd eaten anything and whether the physiotherapy they'd started was going well, and whether I'd like her to bring my library books back since they were probably overdue. I looked at her and I thought, here is what it was supposed to look like. Coming home from the hospital was strange. Everything in the house was the same. The coats on the hooks, the mugs on the shelf, Biscuit complaining at me from the kitchen doorway as if I'd been inconsiderate to be away. But I felt different inside it. Like the walls had shifted slightly, and I was seeing the rooms from a new angle. I thought about what my son had said, about simplifying, about the community in Mississauga. I thought about him sitting in that hospital chair scrolling his phone while I tried to remember how to form words properly again. I thought about 39 calls. I made an appointment with my lawyer in March. Her name is, well, she's my lawyer. I've worked with her since I was in my 40s, since my husband and I bought the house. She is practical and unhurried, and she never makes me feel foolish for asking questions. I walked her through everything: the stroke, the hospital calls, my son's visit, the conversation about the house. I told her about my neighbor. I told her about Preethi, the nurse, and the number 39. My lawyer listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me one question. "What do you want?" she said. Not what did I think was fair. Not my husband have wanted. Not what would keep the peace. Just, what do I want? I sat with it. I told her. We updated the will that afternoon. The $94,000 GIC would go entirely to two organizations, one that supported stroke recovery programs for seniors in Ontario, and one that funded rural healthcare access. Causes my husband had cared about. Causes I cared about. The house, when the time came, would go to my neighbor, with enough set aside to cover the property taxes for a decade, so she'd have time to decide what to do with it without pressure. My son would receive the chest of drawers that had been in my family for 4 generations, which he had admired once when he was 12, and I'd always remembered it, and a letter. I spent a long time on the letter. I didn't write it in anger. I want to be clear about that. By the time I wrote it, the anger had mostly burned off, the way a fever does when it finally breaks. What I wrote it in was something close to clarity. That particular kind of clarity that you get, I think, when you've been lying in a hospital bed, wondering whether you're going to be able to walk properly again, and you've had a lot of time to sort through what actually matters. I told him I loved him. I've always loved him. That part is not complicated, and it will never change. I told him that love is not the same thing as proximity, and I'd understood that when he moved to Calgary, people live their lives, children move away. I accepted that and I meant it, but I also told him that love has a weight to it, that it shows up, that when the phone rings 39 times and the caller ID is a hospital in the city, where your mother lives alone, love picks up. I told him that in the days I lay in that hospital bed, I had the strangest feeling, not self-pity, but something more like revelation. I understood that I had been tending a relationship that had stopped being tended in return a long time ago, and I had kept tending it anyway, out of habit, out of hope, out of the way that mothers are taught to keep showing up regardless of what shows up for them. I was done tending it. That didn't mean I didn't wish him well. I wrote that too. I hoped he had a good life. I hoped Calgary was everything he needed. I hoped that someday, if he had children of his own, he would understand something that I couldn't explain to him now. I sealed the letter and gave it to my lawyer to be delivered when the time came. He called in April. A Sunday, like usual, but longer than usual, 23 minutes instead of 12. He mentioned again that he'd been thinking about my situation. He mentioned that a friend of his had a connection to a real estate agent in Guelph if I was ever interested in exploring the market. He asked, very casually, how I was feeling about everything. I told him I was feeling fine. I told him I was going to physiotherapy twice a week, and it was going well. I told him Biscuit had developed an obsession with sitting on the heating vent, and I was considering it a personality development. I told him the garden was going to be late year because of the cold spring. I did not tell him about the appointment with my lawyer. I did not tell him about the will. I said goodbye, and I sat in the kitchen for a while after, listening to the particular quiet of a house in early April, when the snow is mostly gone, but the birds haven't come back yet. My neighbor came that evening with soup. She does that, just appears with things, without making a production of it. We ate at my kitchen table, and she told me about a book she'd found at the library that she thought I'd like, and I told her about the letter I'd written, and she didn't ask what was in it, because she's that kind of person. When she left, I washed the bowls and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard, at the bare garden beds, at the gray April sky going dark at the edges. I thought about the word uncertain, the word the cardiologist had used. The first 48 hours were uncertain, and I thought about how that had been true in more ways than he meant. Those 48 hours had been uncertain about a lot of things, about whether I would walk normally again, about whether the aphasia would be permanent, about what my life was going to look like on the other side of them. But they had not been uncertain about this, who showed up and who didn't. That part had been very clear. I'm doing well, if you're wondering. My speech is back entirely. The left side is still a little slower than I'd like. My physiotherapist says that's normal, that the brain is extraordinary in how it compensates, that I should be patient with myself. I'm trying. I'm not always good at patience, but I'm trying. I updated my emergency contact form at the hospital. It has one name on it now, my neighbor's. Biscuit has claimed the armchair in the living room as his personal territory, and I've decided not to fight him on it. Some battles are not worth having. I've learned that, this year more than any other. I've learned to put my energy toward the things that give something back. The garden, the library, the Tuesday Bible study group, where Alan still brings Tim Hortons and still gets my order wrong, and I've decided that's fine. The cherry tree in the backyard is going to bloom soon. My husband planted it the year we moved in. Every April it does this, comes back like it forgot the winter entirely. I used to think that was just what trees did. Now I think there's something worth paying attention to in it. The way something can survive a hard season and still insist, quietly and without drama, on showing up in April. I think about that a lot. I think I'm going to be okay.